welcome to the 9th lecture, I think. The penultimate lecture. I always like to say penultimate as often as I can because it sounds weird. The next to last lecture of the series. So next week we will be doing Baha'i and Sikhism, and that is in terms of obviously eclecticism and syncretism. So how do you blend religions, right? Sounds like you can't, but in fact you can quite successfully sometimes. I suspect more people will be coming, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let me remind you that there is material in the lobby for everyone that is free to take. Courses, actual courses that we teach here, as well as program information. There's also, in that very first table, we tried to put it right in front of you, an evaluation and survey. And that is, if you've been coming, let us know what worked, what didn't, and what you'd like to see next. So after Baha'i and Sikhism next week, we're going to take a week off, and then our quarter starts the next week, whatever that is. And so we'll start our series again. I think I'm hearing anecdotally that you want to continue. So if you have ideas about what you'd like for us to cover, please let us know on that sheet. And we'll take that to heart. And it's looking like the Bible, so we may do 10 weeks on the Bible, which means that we can do everything and anything we want. So that'll be fun. It's one of those strange days in Los Angeles, isn't it? It's like the sun is not here. It's cold. I say that in quotation marks because I used to live in Boston, so this is not cold. This is spring in Boston, but it's one of those weird days. So I appreciate you coming out on a weird day to hear a weird guy talk about ritual and Islam. Just one more thing by way of commercial announcement. We do have our second, let's see, I always get this wrong, but I know there's a lot of alliteration in it. Second Saturday Speakers platform that begins in a couple weeks. It's on our calendar. The first speaker up is Jonathan Young, isn't it, Frank?
Yes.
Yeah. I know we just looked over this like 10 minutes ago. Yes, Jonathan Young. These are UPR faculty giving basically faculty lectures on whatever. Sorry, that's not very specific. So yeah, you can go on our website. It'll be right on the front page of the website. You can see the particular lectures. Some will be by teleconference or Skype, because our faculty are all over the world, actually. I'd say about half are here and half are over Skype. I'm doing one, I think, in April on making meaning in the age of irony. Ritual and Islam. So, if you remember, we talked about Buddhism and Buddhism and Islam. We talked about ritual and Buddhism the first time around. And so we're coming around again to ritual, a different aspect of ritual. And in that first lecture discussion on Buddhism, we talked about the body, symbol, and magic. Okay, we talked about ritual being meaning that your body is being put in touch with the sacred, your body. And we talked about the problems of that, of the body, but also as the body as a gateway, the body as a symbol. And we talked about how ritual, like myth, is rife with symbol. Symbol is the language of religion, maybe the grammar of religion. We also talked about magic, how to manipulate the world using ritual, which we do today, which I'm doing right now by using a microphone. Of course, there are all kinds of manipulations of nature. And ritual it's often done in a ritual context. Tonight, I want to talk about rites of passage. So, ritual in terms of putting the body in touch with the sacred, and tonight, a particular, perhaps the most important kind of ritual, and that is the rite of passage. You've probably heard this. I don't know that you've experienced this. I don't know if contemporary America has rites of passage anymore. Maybe getting a driver's license, but I don't know. You can tell me. Marriage, I guess.
Bar mitzvah.
Bar mitzvah, okay.
Bar mitzvah.
Yeah, so, all right, you get it already. So, rites of passage are a particular kind of ritual. There are other kinds of ritual, such as a healing ritual, the Navajo sand painting ritual, for example, which takes you back to creation, to the time before the illness, and recreates the world for you. And you sit in the middle of the sand painting, and the shaman paints the world around you and recreates it back in balance. And so you become back in balance. Rites of passage are just what they say. They are a ritual that moves you from one state of being to another. It moves you from one state of being to another. So marriage, right, moves you from the state of being single to the state of being married. And of course, all that means, right? It changes you. I don't know if it's more common, but another common ritual that we've really lost here is puberty, the transition from childhood to adulthood. A lot of the world's rituals are centered on that. And of course, that is a mark of community membership. So not only are you marking the transition from the state of being a child to the state of being an adult, you're also entering the community of adults and all that means. And basically what it means is it's not as fun, as you know. Much better to be a child. Now, there's been a lot of studies of ritual. I really like Arnold van Gennep's observations on ritual, and a lot of other people did too, and built upon his studies of ritual, or what he called the folkways of primal cultures. It's just very simple and very powerful. He says, or said, that there are 3 stages to a ritual: separation, initiation, and return. And if you stop and think about that, it's a pretty wonderful theory because it's so economical. The best theories are simpler ones, or at least economical ones. Separation, initiation, return. What does that mean? Well, separation means what it says. You are pulled apart from your everyday world, from the world you know. So again, think about purity rituals especially. This is especially powerful in that sense, because you're leaving the world of childhood. You're entering the world of adulthood. And I was only half joking. It's not fun. You enter the world of responsibility. So separation, you're pulled away from the world you knew. Initiation, you are baptized, wink wink, or initiated in other ways into this other world. This usually happens at the middle of the ritual. So it may be a vision quest, it may be baptism itself, that you are initiated, you are brought into, you are born into, really. And then return, and that is return to the world you knew as a person you are no longer. Return to the world you knew as a different person. Now, we've covered this idea before, and if you're thinking, hey, that sounds familiar, that's because it is. This is a man named Joseph Campbell came along and read Arnold van Gennep and made something out of it called the monomyth, or the hero's journey, right? So Campbell's hero's journey has, I don't know, what, 19 steps in it, in the circle that the hero goes through, but they're really just 3. Separation, initiation, return. So it's a pretty powerful theory. It seems to work because theory should work. Theory, again, is about seeing, and so it should work in everything you see, in every ritual you see. And I think it does.
Greg, can you, what's the surname of the author, Joseph?
Arnold van Gennep. Yeah, Arnold van Gennep. I should have put that on the slide, sorry.
Can you spell that? Spell the surname, Gennep?
Yeah, Gennep.
Thank you.
French, Swiss, I think. Yeah. Right. So this is one of the foundational theories in ritual studies. Now, like I said, people came along and built upon this economical theory, and of course what one does in that regard is complicated a little bit. That's okay. That's okay if it works. So one of the Gennep's students was Victor Turner, and he became interested not just in those 3 simple steps, but in something that Gennep called liminality. And Turner made a pretty big deal of it for good reason. So the liminal is simply the between. Between, bless you. So what happens between your everyday world and the separation? What happens between the return and the actual arrival? What happens between the other phases of ritual? Well, that's a really interesting question, isn't it? Because in all of those stages or phases, whether it's your everyday life, whether it's the separation, whether it's the initiation or the return, you are surrounded, not by familiarity, but you are surrounded by structure. It's a ritual. There are steps. There is a structure. There's a form to it. So yes, it's odd, it's unfamiliar, dramatically so, but at least somebody knows the structure. In between those stages, however, is nothing, which can be everything. It can also be maddening and disorienting and alienating. And this is what Turner really wanted to talk about, is these between spaces. Now you may be thinking, what's that got to do with religion? Actually, it has a lot to do with religion if you kind of zoom out. Right? So zoom out and think of between spaces. So there's, if you know anything about Tibetan Buddhism, there's the Bardo Taro, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It's a whole book that's really about the between. It's about navigating that liminal space. Or maybe you don't know that, but maybe you know Catholicism, purgatory. It's between. It's in between this life and the next, and purgatory is not where you want to be, right? It's not a place to hang out. It's an in-between space that's anxiety-producing and alienating. Now, think of your own life. Sometimes these rituals are small and discreet, and they happen within an hour, and sometimes they happen within a decade, and sometimes they happen within a lifetime. Some of you are in between right now. It's not a good place to be. It's an interesting place to be because you're kind of free from the self you knew, but not yet inhabiting the self to come. Right? Frankly, a lot of drug experiences are like this. You're not this, depending on the drug, you're not the self you knew. You're not the self you're going to return to after that, if that's even possible. You're in between. I had a friend, and this is really a friend, it wasn't me, who used to do a lot of LSD. And I was talking to him about it in these terms, these religious terms, and I'm like, well, did you lose yourself? And he said, no. He said, you lost everything, except way down at the bottom, there was a little core that I knew was me. I couldn't trust my senses. I couldn't trust anything around me, anything I thought I knew. But there was still something that was me. And that kind of makes sense to me, right? Because how can you lose yourself without becoming something else, and then you're not yourself, right? We might call that madness today, insanity, psychological illness. If you lived before the advent of medicine, Western medicine, you might be a shaman. You might be a wise person who sees more than the rest of us do. All right. So, liminality, really interesting space. Now, what rites of passage and ritual in general, you may remember this, what they produce is communitas. And, we like to use Latin, especially in religious studies, because it sounds imperious and perhaps intimidating, but there's a good reason to use communitas here, because it's not simple community. We have a community here because we're all in the same space and we're at the same time and we're generally sharing something similar. Communitas is much more radical than that. It's the shared experience of the other. It's not the shared experience of a good restaurant downtown. Okay. It's not the shared experience of a favorite football team. It's the shared experience of the other. And remember, when we talked about the definition of religion, we talked about it as an experience of otherness. Right? So much so that other differences tend to disappear. Right? So there's the Hajj, for example. We're talking about Islam tonight. There's the Hajj, there's the pilgrimage to Mecca required of all good Muslims, or highly suggested of all good Muslims. And class differences disappear at the Kaaba in Mecca. Everyone's the same. Doesn't matter your station. Fortunately, your gender still matters, but all other distinctions kind of fade away. This is true in, trying to think. Oh, I think I mentioned this before. There was the two Great Awakenings in America, which were Christian awakenings, and were stifled because the fledgling American nation could not handle the transgression of class, race, and gender that Great Awakening produced. So there were, I don't remember the exact dates, 18th century, and right at the beginning of the 19th, I think, there was revival, as we used to say in Tennessee in my Southern Baptist church. It was revival. And I mean, it was real. Thousands of people, especially all over the South, converted to Christianity. And they came together in churches, and all differences disappeared. And so masters and slaves were worshiping Christ together. We're taking communion together. We're singing hymns together. Male and female, rich and poor. That sound familiar? That's the language of Paul in the New Testament, and this is what was supposed to happen, right? But who stopped that? Plantation owners. No. They said, okay, go to church, but come back and work, right? And I'm not going to pay you because you're a slave, right? So, communitas is one of the most powerful forces in the world, and also pretty rare. Increasingly rare, I would say. All right. An interesting phenomenon I found is the use of private rituals. And maybe you do this. I know I do this. We talked in the Zoroastrianism lecture about the individual, the personal way, which, remember, it was a relatively new invention, relatively given the history of religion. That you would go your own way, that you would have a path in the world that was unique and not unlike anyone else's path. Well, if you're an individual and if you're following an individual path, what does ritual mean? With its emphasis on communitas, or even just a lower level community. What does that mean? Well, obviously, we're living in such a time. We don't have a lot of rituals. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you're going to correct me. Wendy, are you going to correct me right now?
No, I'm just going to say that, it used to take me 6 hours to set the dinner table, and that was a ritual for me.
Okay,
And
excellent.
my family's like, are you done yet?
Right.
No, a couple more hours.
Yeah, exactly.
Couple more hours, couple more flowers, yeah.
What'd you get out of that?
Peace of mind.
Yeah, it was a kind of meditation.
Trying to be pleasing to the people I love around me that are around
Exactly.
me, you know.
Exactly. We love ritual. We do love it, and sometimes we substitute what's missing with things like setting the dinner table. I don't mean that's a lesser ritual. Obviously, it wasn't for you. But on the outside, it looks lesser. It looks private, which is what I'm talking about too. Private rituals. And so you make your own rituals in your own space. Because remember, ritual always happens in sacred space and time. So that makes perfect sense that 6 hours went by, because that's everyday time. That's not sacred time.
And I wouldn't let them come in until I'm done.
Well, right. They don't belong in sacred space until it's ready.
Because, like you said,
Of course.
I'm doing my thing. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. Did you?
Yeah, I'm wondering to what degree, the word enlightenment comes to mind in this process, but I'm wondering to what degree education plays a role in ritual in America, whether learning to read is a ritual or is a rite of passage.
Yeah. Well, it's a good question. Is learning to read a ritual or a rite of passage? I honestly don't know, because I feel like I have a blind spot on this. I want to say no, because clearly something has happened, and you're different now. You can read, but I guess I like a rich ritual context for my rituals. I like them overflowing with symbols and meaning and purpose and intention, and that doesn't happen. That's like, okay, it's third grade. See, I don't even know, first grade or whatever. We're going to learn to read today and next Monday and the next Monday. That's probably a failure on my part. I don't know if getting a driver's license is that way. No. Okay. Margot?
I'm sorry, I don't want to have you repeat it, but I do. You said sacred time versus what kind of time was it? You were like.
Oh, mundane time.
Versus mundane time.
Sorry, yeah, I went too quickly over there.
And you said sacred time happens like with what about the spaces like?
Yeah, sorry, I was referring to our second lecture on the sacred. No problem. These are on our YouTube channel, by the way. Yeah, so this is a good point. Thank you for bringing it up. Ritual, we've talked about these lenses we're using: the sacred, myth, ritual, community, to the individual. These are related. They're almost developmental. They always happen in order. And so, yes, you cannot have a ritual unless it is in sacred space, that is a space that is marked off as different from the mundane, or the everyday. It has to be marked off to recognize that it's a different kind of space. And within that space, time flows different, or doesn't flow at all, right? You're scribbling rapidly. That's wonderful.
Oh yeah, it's funny.
Every teacher loves to see.
Thank you.
And you're using, what is that technology?
It's a cross pen I got for my birthday for my brother.
Pen. She has a pen.
It's gold.
Haven't seen a pen in a long time. Cool. Any other questions about ritual? Oh, so yeah, I was talking about private rituals. I wanted to share this with you. I think, getting to your point about education, I think there are other things that affect ritual too, like technology, right? So obviously increased communication, travel, more effective travel, it brings more people together. I like to use the metaphor of us, humanity. We're like the galaxy. We are speeding away from each other at incredible speeds, right? We're expanding, and yet our communication is increasing. So the further we get from each other, communication makes it feel like we're closer, but we keep moving. So, private rituals.
Great, one
Yep.
more point. So it would seem maybe that even it's so odd, but in this society, getting a phone
Yeah.
becomes almost a rite of passage. Because
Yeah.
you have parents talking about, are they ready, are they not
Good.
ready? I'm
Yeah,
just
yeah.
saying out loud though.
No, I love that. I think that is a better candidate than most things I think of, because it is an initiation into a new world. And they know this. They do it intuitively. So, yes, initiate separation from the world of stuff and skin and material. Initiation into this new world of a virtual world. And then, do you come back? I don't know. I guess you do, obviously.
And the community, you can now sit at the dinner table with the rest of your family and look at a piece of glass.
Right. That's right. Or a few Saturdays this year, I think we're going to be in this auditorium, but there's going to be a screen with the lecturer. Yeah, that I like that. That's magical. That employs magic. I like that. I'm going to have to incorporate that. Thank you for the idea. So I just wanted to mention this Harvard Business School study on mourning and loss. It's published in the Journal of Experimental Psychology. And they found that individuals who created and participated in their own rituals alone were more resilient and overcame their grief much more than those who did not. These individuals did not connect with the community in any way, but they found great value in the ritual itself. Even apart from the communitas it moves toward, and it provides a structure for passage from one state of being to another, from mourning to acceptance and a renewed appreciation of life itself. Now, this is not so strange if we think about Buddhism, for example, where the path is individual, but you still have a Sangha, you still have a community, but the community is there to support the individual path, not the other way around. Right? So that helps me think through this idea of private ritual and community. It doesn't have to be linear. In fact, it can be reversed, or it can be mutually enhancing. Right? The individual path and the community. And in fact, I don't know anyone, I mean, I've known a lot of people, but I don't know anyone, no matter how solitary the path he or she is traveling, who doesn't want to tell me about it. And if you want to tell me about it, at some level, even the most basic level, you're seeking community. Right? All right. Islam. So, really interesting world religion, obviously. The fastest growing religion in the world. I'm not sure when it's going to overtake Christianity, but I think in a few decades. Let's talk about it. And again, feel free to stop me along the way as necessary. This is not a lecture as much as a discussion, although I do have the microphone. All right, so we talked about with Christianity, the mixture, the milieu that it was born into, of this Roman occupation of Judea and Roman religion and Jewish diaspora religion, formally similar to Islam. Arabia was, it was right on the trade routes. And so obviously it's a desert, but it's a trade route, so you've got to go through there. So what's important? Way stations, stopovers, right? You need water, you need food, you need shelter. In fact, there's still this tradition in the Middle East of, if you're a stranger passing through, I don't care if it's New York City 2017 or Arabia 720, you're supposed to house the stranger. Jesus talks about this. Jesus says it too. You've got to house the stranger because it's just too dangerous to travel. And it's just too hard. So there's a lot of travel going back and forth. The general religion before Muhammad is animism. We've seen this before, the sense that nature is alive in various forms. Rivers, trees, rocks have separate spirits, separate anima. But there was a high god whose name was Allah. A high god. Now, we didn't really talk about high gods, but you find them in sub-Saharan Africa especially. Gods who create and remove themselves. They create, and so they're unlike Yahweh that we talked about in Judaism, who's always involved. They're unlike the Greek gods who are always messing with people. The God creates and steps back when you don't hear from the God. It's a creator God. Actually, America's founders, who were mostly deists, that's a high God concept. So many gods and goddesses all around, many spirits all around. Mecca had been a sacred place since before anyone could remember because of the black stone, which is probably a meteorite, and then an enclosure around it called the Kaaba. That. So again, we're not in an isolated, well, it is isolated, but there's also a lot of traffic going back. So Jews, Christians, traders from the east, traders from the west, traders from the north, all coming through here. So look at that already. Already you've got something going on, right? You've got a lot of commerce, literally, but you've got a lot of commerce in ideas and religions, okay? So people are going to know about things, unlike at other points at some other points in some other religions. People living in Saudi Arabia are going to know about Judaism. They're going to know about Christianity. Interesting to the mix. Muhammad, of course, the founder of Islam, although that's probably not correct. Allah is considered the founder of Islam. I remember studying world religion in college, and the religion was called Mohammedism. I always like to point out in these lectures how we've gone wrong in studying religion. That would be so alien to a Muslim. Like, what, you worship Muhammad? No, that would be expressly forbidden by Muhammad, among other people. So he's born in 570 CE. Remember, we also mentioned that many of these founders are from non-traditional homes, right? Confucius, Moses, the Buddha has his own issues where he leaves home. Same with Muhammad. His parents died early. He was raised by his uncle. And as you'll see as we go through the story, he constantly depends upon the goodwill of his family or his new family of Muslims. So he's kind of born in this state of dependence, in an unusual state of dependence. is because of his lack of family. And remember, this is a family-based, a tribal-based culture. All right, so he worked in the caravans that came through, the trading caravans. He knew Judaism. He knew Christianity. He knew caravan traders. In fact, he married one, a woman named Khadijah. I believe it was 25 and she was 40. Wealthy woman. He fell in love with her, married her. She becomes his first convert. We talked about last time how Christianity could not have flourished without some very important women. Islam, it's hard to see Islam occurring without Khadijah because of her wealth, because of her maturity, because of her support of her husband, which could not have been easy. So he would retire to caves like this one. In fact, this is the cave where the revelation occurred. He would go meditate in the caves. He was a troubled man, as most founders are, and most seekers are. They're troubled, they're restless. Something's not right, they're looking. This was Muhammad. He did not read or write. He enters this cave to meditate, and this is just like thinking. And he hears the angel Gabriel say this, read. He doesn't read. Read, in the name of your Lord who created, he created man, who taught by means of the pen, who taught man what he did from a clinging form. Read, your Lord is the most bountiful one. Remember what we said about the nature of the other, the nature of the sacred. It is not warm and fuzzy, it is terrifying. It produces a sense of awe, fear, and fascination. This is what happened with Muhammad. This is not something you run home and say, hey, guess what happened to me? It was awesome. Not that kind of awesome. Awe, like overwhelming rapture and confusion and fear. Because it's the other. You don't know it. You've never encountered it before. How can you embrace it? So this happens actually over 23 years. The Quran is delivered to Muhammad in this way. It is the most sacred book in any religion. Now, I grew up in the South. I grew up across the street from a Baptist church, and I was told that the Bible is the literal, inerrant Word of God. But they also recognized that human beings wrote it. Not so in Islam. God wrote it. Allah wrote it. And Allah speaks Arabic, right? So there is no separation here. This is the Word of God. You can translate it, but it's not the Word of God. It's a translation of the Word of God. Right? So you don't mess with it. You treat it as sacred. You don't carry the Quran in and flip it open and start. You have to do a ritual, a cleansing ritual, to even read it. Yeah. So it is treated with a veneration that no other religion treats its holy book. All right. Now, what is this revelation? What is the Quran? Well, it's a completion, again, according to Islam, it's the completion of a revelation that began with Judaism and Christianity. I don't think a lot of people know this, but Islam is continuous with Judaism and Christianity. They see it as the same tradition. They see it as a completion of that tradition, in fact. Just similarly, as Christianity saw itself as the completion of Judaism, right? So for Muslims, this is, and so Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Mary, all the biblical figures are venerated in Islam. They're prophets. Not unlike Muhammad. They have that prophetic weight. It's just that Muhammad is the last prophet. Muhammad completed, or was the vehicle for completing the revelation. What is the revelation? Well, one God, right? Remember, we saw this inaugurated with Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism. And Judaism right around the same time. This is a continuation of that. Well, that is about as radical a notion as you could introduce in Arabia in the 7th century. Why? Because not only was there polytheism, not only were there idols and spirits, there was big business in the idols. You sold the idols, exchanged them. This was the major business of Arabia. So remember how Zoroaster comes in and he flips the script on everybody. They're worshiping these devas who are capricious, malevolent sometimes. He's like, no, there's only one God. And that worship of devas is inappropriate and incorrect. Muhammad does the same thing, only I think with higher stakes, because the religion he's attacking or subverting or overthrowing is also the business of the country, especially around the Kaaba, the sacred site. Where else are you going to find your idols, right? Except around the sacred space? So right, open hostility from the merchants on the trade routes. Dude, what are you doing messing with my business? What is this Allah thing? You know, we need several gods. We need, look, I have them right here. It's hard going. Khadijah, his wife, his first follower. Ali, his stepson. Zaid, his servant. Abu Bakr. It's very slow going, as it often is with the development of a new religion. Because remember, we've talked about how this separation has to occur. With Christianity, it has to separate from Judaism. With Hinduism, it has to separate from the Aryan religion. This is a brand new, this is more akin to Zoroastrianism. This is an alien religion inserted. Well, I don't mean it to be that strong. It is monotheism, and they did know about Jews and Christians. But it is a very different kind of religion. Moreover, one that's going to wreck the economy. It was also a tribal society. And so Muhammad, without the protection of his clan, the Quraysh clan, would not have survived. And so again, we talk about what makes these religions develop. Without that, he would have probably been killed. And in fact, it gets so bad that he does have to leave in what's called the first hijrah. You may have heard of the second hijrah, that's more important. But he actually flees Mecca for what is now Ethiopia. And who shelters him? Christians. Christians shelter Muhammad in the first hijrah because he simply fears for his life because of what he's done with this new religion. Then something interesting happens. Muhammad obviously is gaining followers slowly, but he's also the guy at the center of this new thing, right? This new thing. And apparently, by all records, Muhammad was a special person. He's described as being full of equanimity and patience and kindness. He's also said to be a very attractive man. And so he's one of those guys to whom people defer. And then, of course, his life is threatened, so he gains from that what one can. And he starts to get a reputation as a wise ruler. Not ruler, but a wise judge. A person who can judge a situation and, give wisdom in it. In fact, there's a problem in Yathrib, which is now called Medina. And they hear about this Muhammad guy, and they send 12 delegates down to Mecca, once he goes back to Mecca, sorry, they send 12 delegates down and ask him to come to Medina to help them out, to judge, to give advice, to be wise. And so he moves to Medina. This is important. He has moved from his home, from the beginnings of the religion, to Medina. To what? To become more than the head of a tribe. To become a super tribal leader. Sorry, that's an inelegant phrase. He's bigger than a tribe. He's a governor. I don't even want to say politician because it's more based on wisdom. And so he goes to Medina. This is called the Hijra. And the Muslim calendar is dated from this date, 622. Right, so if you ask a Muslim what year it is, subtract 622 from what year you think it is. Because then it's called AH, the Ano Hijra. This is so important that Muslims date their calendars from this. All right. Interesting that of the 12 delegates that came down from Yathrib, 10 were Jews seeking help from Muhammad. Not just, seeking wisdom and governance, because the political situation is so bad in these cities. And of course, outside the cities are these warring clans. Well, things began to really take off after the death of Muhammad. This is the birth of what's called the Caliphate. Now, Caliph just simply means leader. Khalifa, I believe it is in Arabic. It just means leader. So, remember, we've always seen this problem. What happens at the death of the founder? Crisis happens, always. Because the founder's not there to correct. He's not there to say, oh no, I didn't mean this, or Allah didn't mean this. He meant this. He's gone. So someone has to take over. So the first 4 caliphates are relatives of Muhammad in one way or another. That can't last, of course, although we're going to come back to this in a minute, because it's the birth of one of the major sects of Islam. But what happens is, my point for this slide is that Islam spreads like no religion has ever spread in that century after the death of Muhammad. Why? I don't think I'm really capable. I'm not an Islamic scholar, but it seems to me, from what I've read, that it has to do with a number of things. One of them being the ability to transcend the tribal warfare and political problems of Arabia. Because as you can see, people are seeking help. They sought help from Muhammad. Another is that this kind of becomes a super tribe, a bigger tribe. Again, remember communitas. When you've entered into communitas, those old differences don't matter. I think that's a real appeal of Islam from this period to this day, is that it transcends those old differences. In fact, that's the general appeal of any new religion. Yeah?
Sorry, I have to ask, was he somehow assassinated, or was his death the cause of a, culmination of some sort?
Funny you ask. He was not assassinated directly, but he was poisoned. It's thought that he died from this poisoning, and it was under the guise of, let's come together and mediate this situation. And I can't remember the woman's name, but there was a woman who was serving the men who were discussing the issue, and she poisoned the lamb. He recovered, but it is thought that he died from that eventually. So yeah, good question, good point. Another thing about why this religion might have spread as it did It's easy. All you have to do is say the Shahada. There's no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. Say it with conviction, you're a Muslim. You don't have to get circumcised. You don't have to get baptized. You don't have to do anything. Just say it with meaning. Very powerful, right? Another thing. There's so many things that contribute to this spread. Consider the Hajj, right? So the pilgrimage to Mecca. Just look at that map and imagine the Hajj going to Mecca. So as it spreads, it's not just spreading and settling. There's this constant migration back, not migration, but travel back and forth, right? So you enter a new territory. People convert to Islam because sometimes they had no choice, but I'll come back to that. And then they become a Muslim, and so one of their duties is to go to Mecca from where they are, all over the world. So you've got this centripetal force and centrifugal force. There's no better vehicle for spreading a religion. There just isn't. And so again, you're transcending those old differences for the sake of this communitas, this new faith that you're a part of. And you're going back every year. And you're meeting new people. And the next year you go back, there's someone from Asia. And the next year you go back, there's someone from Europe, maybe Spain. That's powerful. That's seductive. When you can literally see the religion spreading each year by your discourse and intercourse, I just mean interaction, with the people you meet on the Hajj. So, an Islamic golden age emerges, 786 to 1258. Now again, I did not get this in college, and I was a religion major. I don't figure most people get this, but if you value anything in Western culture, you owe it to Islam. Sure, you can go back to Greece, and there's lots from Greece that we have kept alive today, but it would have been lost without Islam. There was the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. Baghdad emerges as new center of the world. That's not a metaphor. It's the center, because remember what's happening in Europe at this time. Black Death, Catholic Church is a mess, politics is a mess. It's the Dark Ages. But in Islam, it's the Golden Age. And in Baghdad, there's this House of Wisdom where one of the enterprises was a translation movement. So they took those old Greek texts and those old Latin texts and Persian texts and Chinese texts, and they paid the best translators in the world to come and translate them into Arabic and thereby preserve them. It is said that if you were a translator in the House of Wisdom in Baghdad during the Golden Age, you were essentially a celebrity in Los Angeles. That's how much money you made. That's how you were treated. That's not an exaggeration. That was the priority of the Muslim civilization, was knowledge. So this is another reason I think this faith spread and continues to spread. Remember that in all the other religions, there's always this tension with the surrounding culture. Not so in Islam. There's an embrace of the surrounding culture. Not only that, there's an embrace of the world and all its learning. So much so that the Caliph in Baghdad would pay translators. Can you imagine translators getting paid like LeBron James to translate stuff? That was the world, right? And the movement here was not just with text, it was with everything. It was all knowledge. Medicine, philosophy, math, science, social sciences, healthcare. I could spend hours just talking to you about all this that Islam created or supplemented. So the movement was accumulate the known knowledge, and the translation movement helped that. Synthesize it, advance it, and then promulgate it. Right? So it wasn't just bring it all in. It was bring it all in, and let's compare it, and let's see what's best, what works best. Let's add to it. Let's add our own observations and experiments to it, and then let's spread it back out into the world. So again, it's that centripetal and centrifugal movements with not only Islam, but with knowledge and civilization. Sorry, losing my voice. Algebra, algorithm, alkaline. These are all Muslim Arabic words based on inventions or advancements by Muslims in the Golden Age. All right, I want to keep moving because I know you're going to have a lot of questions. The sects of Islam. Most Muslims, sorry, losing it. Lecture 9, losing my voice. Most Muslims, about 85%, are Sunni, which they're basically the, trying to think of how to put it, they're just the traditional Muslims. We can talk about sects within Sunni Islam if you want, but most Muslims are Sunni, and they're going to try to follow the Quran and the 5 pillars that we're going to talk about in a minute. There's about 10% of Muslims worldwide that are Shia, or you might have heard of them as Shiite. This comes from a dispute over the leadership. Remember when I was talking about the first caliphs and what happens after Muhammad dies? And it's familial, it's family succession, except there was a big mess at about the 4th generation where Ali was, some people thought Ali should have been the next caliph, and it wasn't. It was, I'm sorry, I forgot. It was a different caliph. And that began the Shia's split. It goes back to the 8th century, or 7th century, sorry, where this split occurred, where the wrong caliph was chosen. So, because of that, the Shia developed the religion differently. There's a different theology to Shia Islam. So there are imams in Sunni Islam, but they're not, they just lead prayers. They're just like, somebody's got to get everybody together and lead prayer. That's an imam. In Shia Islam, the imam is much more important. There's much more divinity or authority vested in the imam. And in fact, the imams, it depends on which version of Shia you're looking at. There's some are the Seveners, which says there will be 7 major imams before the apocalypse. Some are 12ers, there'll be 12 major imams, or Mahdis. Martyrdom becomes a theological virtue. Why? Because Ali was martyred. See? So if the person you think was the true follower of Islam was murdered for his faith, then religions of any kind tend to follow that example. Christians did it. Finally, there are Sufi Muslims who are really interesting. This is the mystical sect of Islam. Fascinating people. If you've read Rumi, the poet Rumi, or oh man, my memory is going. There's a mystical sect to Islam. You may have heard of the whirling dervishes, maybe in Turkey, who just spin. And Sufi means woolen, so they wear these woolen robes and they spin, and the robes bloom out. You may have seen that, whirling dervishes. There are several sects within these sects, but I'm giving you a big picture. Yeah, really interesting mystical elements to Islam. All right, let's clear some things up. Jihad. Jihad, I always like to go back to etymology. You saw me do that in the very first lecture. Let's see what the word means from its original construction. Jihad in Arabic means struggle. There are all kinds of struggles. We know this, everybody knows this. There are all kinds of struggles. Sure, there are military struggles, but the larger struggle is the spiritual struggle. And that's what is mostly referred to by jihad when Muslims speak of jihad. I remember after 9/11, there was, I think it was at Yale, there was a Yale graduate who, he was given the student commencement address, and he called it My American Jihad. I'm like, yeah, that's a good title. Nope, bad title, because people were not understanding jihad in the full sense of spiritual struggle. It also means military struggle, because let's remember where Islam was born, and Muhammad feared for his life, and there was a battle, and there was a conquest. So sure, it means that too. But this is called the lesser jihad, when you have to fight. Yeah. There's also Sharia law, which you've probably heard. Sharia law is incredibly misunderstood, like many concepts in Islam. It means, again, the etymology in the word in Arabic is the way to the water. In other words, it's the path. What path should you trod? Right? Now, it is worth remembering that we're the only country that has this separation of church and state. Separation of church and state is a brand new concept, and it did not exist in Islam, just as it did not exist in Europe. And so, if you're going to have a religion, you don't separate it from the political sphere. Why would you in that context at that time? And so, sure, is there a political element to Sharia? Well, yeah. You know, it's not unlike the Ten Commandments. Those have political effect, right? Don't murder people. That's a social, legal, and political, as well as a religious dictate. Sharia is no different. It's the way to the water. For example, you want an example of Sharia law? Muslims are required, it's called the zakat, we're going to get to that next, to give, it averages out about 2.5% of their income to the poor. Required. Now, this is not, you know, what we may know of, okay, I'll throw a buck or two at the plate as it goes by. No, this is required. In fact, under Sharia law, that's not your money. That money belongs to the poor, and if you keep it, you are guilty of theft. How about that? That's part of Sharia law. Now, anytime you're intersecting religion, politics, law, and ethics, it's going to be a mess. Sharia law is a mess because it's different things at different times to different people. But basically, it's trying to follow Allah, and whatever that means, without pulling apart from the society, by doing it within the society. All right, let's close up here with the 5 pillars. You probably heard of the 5 pillars. This is what is required to be a Muslim. The Shahada. Repetition of the creed. There is no God but Allah. Muhammad is his messenger. Again, pretty simple. Say it with conviction, you're in. Salat. Daily prayer. You probably know this, 5 times a day, specific times, facing toward Mecca. By the way, one of the developments in cartography during the golden age of Islam was because they had to figure out where Mecca was. If you're in Spain, or if you're in Southeast Asia, you've got to know where Mecca is. You better get your cartographic skills going. Zakat, almsgiving, again, this is not voluntary. You owe the poor 2.5% of your income. If you don't give it, you're stealing from the poor. Song, fasting, you know this is Ramadan probably. So again, lots of religions have fasting as part of their rituals. No religion has a month-long fast as part of the ritual. An annual, month-long fast. And then of course it ends with a great feast. And by the way, this fasting is during daylight, so you can drink water and eat lightly at night. And then of course the Hajj, the pilgrimage. This is the trip to Mecca, which is highly suggested. It's the fifth pillar. Muslims, I try to talk, when I talk to Muslims, and I say, well, you know, the Hajj, you can't really do that, can you? Oh no, it's expected. And I'm like, yeah, it's expected, but they won't give it in. They're like, no, and I'm like, so have you done the Hajj? No, but I will, and I believe them. But it's an onerous, especially if you're poor and you're not in Saudi Arabia, it's especially onerous requirement. So it's probably done the least of the 5. But as you can see, the other 4 are just, you can do them anywhere. You don't inflict anything on anyone, and in fact, you give to other people. And I think that's what makes it a powerful religion. All right, thanks for your attention. You must have questions. I apologize if I implied that the Shahada is enough. It is not enough. I'm saying that in the process of conquest and colonization, if you capture a people, invade their land, you're not going to require them to alternate their body, to do something to their body, to change dramatically. You're just going to have them say the Shahada. Now, eventually, they're going to do the other 5 pillars, the other 4 pillars too, right? So, like I was saying, when I talk to my Muslim friends and I say, you can't really do the Hajj, right? They're like, oh no, we're going to do the Hajj. It is the 5 pillars. So, thank you for letting me clarify that. They don't pick and choose. It's the 5 pillars. It's just that the Hajj is the hardest one. So, right, and the Shahada is not enough. So, you've got to do the others as well. Now, the Abrahamic lineage of Islam is, you may remember this story, Abraham had another son. He had Isaac, which we talked about with Judaism, but he had another son through his handmaid, Hagar. And that son was named Ishmael. So Isaac and Ishmael were brothers. This is another brother story. There's so many brother stories. But Sarah, Abraham's wife, becomes jealous of Hagar and Ishmael, sends them out into the desert to die. But a spring comes up in the desert and keeps them alive. This is the Muslim tradition. This is the Muslim story of Abraham. They see themselves as descendants of Ishmael. Jews see themselves as descendants of Isaac. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I believe the shrine to Hagar and Ishmael, where the well is near the Kaaba, I think. So I think that's part of the Hajj, that you go to this well where Ishmael was saved.